Hello and good evening, and welcome to the latest meeting of the Hammersmith and Fulham Cabinet. I will shortly introduce the agenda and go through apologies. Before doing that, I would introduce myself. I'm Stephen Cowan. I'm the leader of the London Borough of Hammersmith and Fulham. And as we meet tonight, everyone in the room is wearing masks and everybody is socially distanced. Indeed, this is a virtual meeting because the current legislation does not allow for us to have 100% virtual meetings. So there are sufficient councillors in the room to make the meeting legal, which means it has to be quorate, but only that number. And I think that's extremely important. We're now 18 months into the COVID crisis, and there have been many deaths throughout our country and throughout our community, which I'm always mindful. It was always likely that the virus would continue to mutate. And while scientists around the world have been extremely innovative in the way that they have been able to combat the disease, it is still a pandemic that we all have a responsibility to combat in our own individual way. At the time that I'm speaking, there are over 80 Omicron cases in London alone. And that we have seen before can quickly grow exponentially if it is not controlled. Indeed, this time last year, the disease began to grow exponentially, leading me to have a meeting with all London council leaders on Sunday, the 13th of December, where we were told unless there was a lockdown within 8 days, that the disease would be out of control. And sadly, there was not that lockdown. And everything that Dr. Kevin Fenton, the London Director for Public Health, predicted could come true, sadly did. His message to us then was that if we don't take measures then, which we didn't, then there would be at least a need for a 6-month lockdown, and there would be many more deaths, more than the first wave. Now, it is a tribute to all the council leaders across London of all political persuasions that we were united in that meeting on Sunday, the 13th of December 2020, in calling for a lockdown. And it is upsetting that calling was not answered. But as a metaphor for where we are now, it is certainly important that we heed the government's current advice. And that advice is wear a mask in all indoor public places. Indeed, if you're going anywhere not within the legislation, I would advise you to wear a mask, remain 2 meters apart, keep sanitizing and washing your hands. And in the biggest advice of all is get vaccinated. It's not just about us, it's about the people we will see over Christmas. Many of them are loved ones. And the best way of protecting them is to make sure we're vaccinated and we are not carrying the Omicron virus. So I hope there will not be a need for further measures as we look forward to the next year in 2022 with some degree of optimism. But I do want to stress, as the leader of this borough, that we are watching the spread of this latest mutation extremely nervously, as is everybody in public life. And it's only right and proper that I warn the public to take the actions and to heed the concerns being expressed at all levels of government. Okay, on that note, I will now move on to confirm that the people in the room are Councillor Ben Coleman, Councillor Andrew Jones, Councillor Wesley Harcourt, and Councillor Sharon Holder. I would also like to confirm that the following members of the Cabinet are, as ever, taking part. And so we have Councillor Adam Connell, Councillor Larry Culhane has sent his apologies, Councillor Sue Fenimore, Councillor Lisa Homan, Councillor Max Schmidt, and we are fortunate to have Kim Smith, the Chief Executive, along with other members of the senior leadership team logging in, and indeed Rian Davis, who is the monitoring officer as well. So thank you, everybody, as usual, for all you're doing to keep us safe and keep our services running. I now move on to item number 1, which is minutes for Cabinet meeting held on the 1st of November 2021. Can I ask my colleagues in the room, are those minutes agreed?
Agreed.
That's unanimous. They are agreed. So thank you very much. I will now sign the minutes. Thank you. Apologies for absence. I've already given. Councillor Larry Culhane has kindly sent his apologies in. Are there any declarations of interest?
Not from me, no.
Nope, none received. Right, we move straight on to item number 4, building collaborative networks with European states. This is my report. I will therefore set out the details of the document. We face a time where Britain has severed its relations with its formal relations as a member of the European Union in a way that affects culture, affects trade, affects our future. And whatever the rights and wrongs of that, I think most people know my view, it was wrong. We are determined that we recognize that we are still members of the European continent, and the fellow European states around us are our neighbors, and we have many issues that we want to rise to together in consult with them, ranging from climate change and air quality and all the factors around that, to strength of our economy, security of our peoples. And the best way that these relationships remain strong is to have strong familial ties across the European family with our citizens. We are already fortunate enough to be twinned with 3 boroughs. I've had meetings in recent months with the mayors of Neukölln, who we already had strong ties with, but also the mayor of Anderlecht, Neukölln being a borough in Berlin and Anderlecht being a municipality in Brussels. And they're extremely refreshing meetings. One of the key factors in those meetings is that we're not just meeting as politicians. There are also members of residents' associations and cultural groups, ranging from rowing societies and choir groups to other amenity groups you would get in any developed democracy. And so it is our view that it is important for us to not only strengthen the ties we have with our current twins, but to extend that family. We believe it will grow organically, but we can start the process politically. And the idea that our schools are linked, that our citizens find ways of linking and sharing in all the joys that it is to live on this continent, I think is an important one, not just because it will enrich our quality of life for now, but it will also indeed, I think, protect our culture going forward into the future. So this paper is a paper setting out a determination to strengthen those ties. We have this paper has been shared with our twins in Anderlecht and Neukölln, and we hope that the citizens of Hammersmith and Fulham will enjoy the better links we have with our European partners as a consequence of actively trying to encourage those civic ties. I would stress, ever since I've done this job, I've always believed that the way to have a strong society is to encourage civic ties. And that means to build up and strengthen civic life. And where we see that working best, whether it's the resident associations or the amenity groups, or indeed the numbers of volunteers who helped in H&F Can and the mutual aid groups during the pandemic, we could see that we were the stronger for knowing each other and working together. And it enriched all of us to have such friends across all sections of our communities in Hammersmith and Fulham. So extending that internationally across Europe is our first stage. We will certainly extend it elsewhere as well. We have good ties with people in the United States, and we certainly hope to do that similarly. But Europe is our closest neighbours, and that's where we are starting. And that's what this paper sets out. Okay, any comments from any of my colleagues? Ben, you were in the meeting with Neukölln and very impressively spoke fluently German to them. Is there anything you would care to add?
Nein, danke schön.
Okay, right. Any questions from the Cabinet? Okay. Well, any questions from anybody else? In which case, is that paper agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. Next, we move on to the Parks Commission report. We are fortunate enough to have both Julie and Rosemary in the room, fully masked up, I'm happy to say, and fully vaccinated, I'm happy to say, who were two hardworking voluntary members of the Parks Commission. And we also have Tim Prager, who is the chair of the Parks Commission. We've had a number of commissions throughout our time. Rosemary Pettit was one of the first in chairing our Quality Commission, but recently they've ranged from the Disabled People's Commission to the Civic Campus Commission. Not only are these fundamental parts of how we strengthen civic life in working with people and doing things with our residents, not to them, but I think we get vast amounts of benefit from the wells of wisdom that are out there from people who really care about the issues that these independent commissions do. This is an independent commission, and so we always welcome all the work. It does not always mean we accept all the recommendations, but they have a process to go through before they become council policy. But what they are is a very good platform for the recommendations, and we accept them in the first instance as format for policy documents, which is what they have always proved to be. So on that basis, can I introduce Tim Prager? Can I introduce Wesley Harcourt to say a few more words just about, Sharon Holder to say a few more words about her paper. And then we'll call in Tim in a second or two.
Thank you very much, Leader. This report is the final report from the residents-led Parks Commission and was well received when presented to the Community Safety and Environmental Policy and Accountability Committee on the 8th of November. The Commission launched in January, was chaired by Tim Prager. All the commissioners have been very active and fully committed to producing the key recommendations informed by their extensive research, which they believe will improve parks and open spaces for our residents. I will now ask Tim Prager, Chair of the Parks Commission, to summarise the report. Tim, over to you.
Over to you, Tim.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Holder. Thank you, Leader. I'm delighted to be able to speak with you this evening, and I want to thank you for entrusting us with this task. It's been a long one. It's I think it's almost 2 years since we began, but absolutely fascinating. And of course, COVID demonstrated to us just how important our parks are in our community. I've been fortunate enough to have a talented group of commissioners with different skills, expertise, and different perspectives on the parks and how they should be used and how they could best be used. And the report that you see in front of you is one of consensus by all the commissioners, and its recommendations are ones which I think are largely practical. I'd like to just name the commissioners, if you wouldn't mind. I know that Judy Hargaden is in the room. I'm delighted she's there, as is Rosemary Mortimer. Lindsay Tethel-Wright, Richard Jackson provided outstanding contribution to the report, as did Jen O'Reilly, John Goodyear, Isabella Thomas, Kevin McIntosh, and Heather Farnborough, without whose help writing it and editing it, I think we probably wouldn't have gotten to the end. So I want to thank her especially. Thank you. We enjoy excellent parks in Hammersmith and Fulham. And during COVID, as I said, many residents were reminded just how important they are. Our report breaks down into some broad categories. We looked at, in particular, engagement and democracy. We wanted to ensure that all residents feel welcome in and ownership in our parks. And we wanted to look at ways we could enhance that. We looked at affordability, something that was concerning to me when we began this investigation. We want all residents to be able to feel that they can afford to use our parks. We want schools and organizations to feel the parks don't price them out, that they're able to offer things to all residents, and that they're able to use all of our facilities. We looked at financial efficiency and returning value to residents. We looked at old agreements. We looked at some of the old customs and wondered whether or not they were still fit for purpose. We also looked at how technology could be deployed as a solution for in some of these areas to increase value to the council and to residents. We looked at environmental best practices, how the parks could support the commitments of the council and recommendations of other resident-led commissions like the Climate Emergency, Clean Air and Biodiversity Commissions. And finally, we looked at maintenance. And of course, the maintenance observations we made and recommendations were contained in our interim report. So in fact, this Parks Commission has provided 2 reports. The interim report was provided to officers and to the council, and we're gratified that many of our recommendations in the interim report were integrated into the procurement specifications for the maintenance contract. And finally, I'd like to thank Steve Hollingworth for all of his assistance and hard work on our behalf, Jim Cunningham for guiding us through to the delivery of the report. These were excellent council officers in our minds and were really, really helpful. I'd like to thank Sharon Lee, Councillor Wesley Harcourt, and Councillor Holder for your consideration and appreciation of the Parks Commission's report and the things that we've been able to offer. Thank you very much.
Well, once again, we can't thank you enough. It's the sheer number of hours you put in on this was staggering, and chairing meetings is never easy, but all of you volunteers, none of you paid, all of you there for one reason, that you care about Hammersmith and Fulham's parks. I can only say that the people of Hammersmith and Fulham will be rightfully grateful for the work that you have done, and it typifies the strength of our civic life to have such heroes of activism as you have been. So thank you very much.
That's very kind. Thank you.
All right. Any questions from the cabinet? Anything, Ben or Wesley? Or you started this process, didn't you, Wesley? Anything you want to say?
Yeah, that's right. The process of the Parks Commission began when I still had the portfolio. My portfolio still included parks, and I really would just like to say thank you to Tim and to all the other members of the Commission for the incredible amount of work they've done. It's not been very easy at all, and then in the middle of this, you end up with the pandemic and having to shift to online meetings and everything else, and continue doing all that amount of work is incredible. Not only that, the actual quality of the report and the recommendations and things are really, really important for us moving forward, and how it links in with our green agenda and also links in with our air quality and climate change agenda. So once again, thanks to everybody who participated in it.
Okay, thank you. Are there any more questions on the Parks report? In that case, I'll sum up by... hello? Sorry, Councillor Bottle-Brown-Peller, did you want to talk?
Yes, please.
Okay, all right. I'll invite you in. I would say I'm a little surprised. I'm pleased to see not just one Conservative councillor here tonight, but 3. It's been, what, a year since we last saw you at a cabinet meeting, and and a bit like buses, not in 2s, you turn up in 3s. But welcome back, I would say, and thank you very much for coming. Ask your question, please.
First of all, Councillor Cowan, I think that's an extraordinary thing to say, but leaving that aside, on behalf of the Conservative opposition, I would like to thank Mr. Prager and the other members of his independent panel. And we obviously have spoken when we met at the Environment Committee, when the ideas were first presented. And what I particularly appreciated about them was that they're practical, 22 practical suggestions or recommendations. And it's just, I know very well that this takes, these recommendations won't happen without further cabinet reports and approvals and so on and so forth. So my question is not obviously directed to you, but to the leader of the council, is which recommendations does he favour at the moment, and what is the timescale for bringing them forward?
It's a good question. As you know, the process is with all, well, you don't know, the process with all the cabinet meetings we've had so far has been that the reports are put forward and then they are developed by the cabinet member and the Policy and Accountability Committee. And they're taken forward in different groupings, brought with budgets and legal recommendations, as you would expect the due process to be. So that's not the time for me to start doing all of that 6-month process or 3-month process now. And I guess if you've been to previous meetings, you'd have seen that process on previous commissions. But I can assure you that due process will run through all these recommendations, and they are deeply welcomed and will be implemented as they go through due process and the democratic debate. Any more questions? Great. Well, let me just thank Sharon Lee as well.
I await to see. I await to see.
Sorry.
With interest. Okay. Thank you.
I think that's said. Look, if we could, I know it's difficult being online, but if you could wait to speak until I call you, that would be easier, I think, which is the process. But obviously, it is given that we will be bringing these things forward in due time. I would like to thank Sharon Lee, the Strategic Director for the Environment, who I can tell you is a breath of fresh air. The Parks Commission in part came about because we were disaggregating our service after many complaints from the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea. And one of Sharon's funniest stories, which she'll be horrified of me sharing, is the director she took over from gave a stark warning that disaggregation would cost us millions of pounds more in cost because they were making huge savings. And I can see one of the commissioners shaking her head. But not only did we save money, we got, as we've often done in this administration, we have got better frontline services. And I think what we now, and not only have we got better frontline services, but the administration in Hammersmith and Fulham and its residents have much greater control over those services and what happens in our parks. And that could have easily gone wrong, but it stayed on track because of the work of Sharon Lee and Steve Hollingsworth. And officers don't often get the praise they deserve. They often just get contacted when things have gone wrong. But I would like to pay tribute to Sharon's supreme management skill in delivering more for less for our residents, which is what the public sector needs to do. So thank you very much to Sharon as well, and to Steve Hollingsworth. Okay. Right, is this report agreed? Thank you very much. And thank you once again, Tim, Rosemary, and Julie.
Thanks. Thank you very much for inviting us to participate. Thank you.
It really is our pleasure. Right, that item is now agreed. We will move on to the health and wellbeing, harm reduction, treatment and prevention procurement strategy. That is the responsibility of Councillor Ben Coleman. I hand over to you, Ben.
Thank you very much, Leader. Just to say a quick word about the strategy and the slightly new approach we're taking. Perhaps I think we think a better approach to reduce harm and increase treatment and prevention. There are two lots here. There are two procurements here. We're trying to integrate adults, drug, alcohol and tobacco services. And we also want to continue integrating young people's drug and alcohol and sexual health services. And the idea is that we want to try and avoid fragmented services with people getting picked up and passed from one service to the other. And maybe there are gaps where things aren't picked up. So that's what we're trying to achieve here. Join things up, have one front door for people with complex health needs, mental health needs, streamline referrals, improve coordination. And the integrated young people service is doing well. After 24 months, it's had good outcomes. And we hope that taking the same approach with adults would also get us better outcomes. I just mention one other thing. We're also quite strong on doing things in a financially efficient way, ruthlessly financially efficient. It's one of our watchwords as a council. So I've made sure this contract is not for a straight 7-year term, but it's a 3 + 2 + 2 year contract, which means that there are at least 2 points at which we will look at the evidence and see if we want to continue. So that way we continue to safeguard public funding. But otherwise, I hope you approve the new approach for adults and support the continuing approach for children. Thank you.
Okay, great. Any points from anybody else? Is that item agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much. Item is agreed. Next, we have improving private sector housing through discretionary property licensing. Over to Wesley. It's also a report from Councillor Homan. Councillor Homan is not in the room. And while she may want to comment, the only legal cabinet member who can comment is Wesley, as he's in the room. Councillor Harcourt.
Thank you, Leader. As you've just said, this is a joint report between Councillor Homan and myself. Obviously, Councillor Homan is the Cabinet Member for Housing, and in my brief is the licensing aspect, hence why the joint report. I'm sure Councillor Homan would like to make a few comments after I finished speaking. Basically, the scheme is about licensing schemes to be implemented when the current schemes run out and expire at the end of June next year. The report covers the licensing for HMOs, housings in multiple occupation, and also the licensing for the rented properties in 24 streets across the borough. What was I going to say? We're looking about the licensing and the costs. One of the things we have to take into account, and it's point worth making before anyone makes any comments about the costs, we are required, following the Hemming versus Westminster judgment, to make sure that any costs for licensing are actual costs incurred by the council. They're split into 2 parts. One bit is admin and one part is actually the enforcement and management of the scheme. So basically, that's about as much as I want to say on this, and would recommend that we agree this. If anybody's got any questions, I'll do what I can to take them. And if there's any questions specific about housing, I'll leave that to Lisa.
Lisa, anything you'd like to add?
Thank you. Yes, I think it's important that we do carry on these 2 schemes. As Councillor Harcourt has already outlined, the current schemes were introduced in 2017. They're due to expire in June this year, which is why we are coming back to Cabinet seeking approval to extend them. I would draw your attention to page 203 in the report, which shows some of the things that we've managed to improve over the last 5 years. I think it's also important for me as Cabinet Member for Housing, we have 1/3 of our residential property in the borough is private rented. We have roughly 1/3 owner occupied, 1/3 private rented, and a 1/3 social housing. That means 1/3 of people need some sort of protection from problems that they might encounter with their landlords. And that's why I think it's very important that we carry on with this scheme. I think it's true to say, and we must make it very clear, we don't think all private landlords are bad landlords. But it is very important to try and work with ones that need to improve for our residents. And I've had a couple of queries about this report. It's actually gone quite well over the last 5 years. Things have improved, but when we set out with, in particular, the selective licensing scheme, we are in a situation where the government only allowed us to do it over 20% of our properties. And some of you may remember that we kind of selected 20% where we thought the biggest problems were. And of the streets that we're planning to continue with, 16 of those streets are streets that were in the original scheme. There are 8 new streets coming into the scheme, and that's been done by quite a lot of work in terms of antisocial behaviour, which is not just about people, it's about rubbish management and things like that. So there's been quite a lot of very detailed work, including walking those streets by officers to make sure that we actually get the right 20% in the scheme. So I think I'll leave it at that for now, but happy to take any questions. But I would recommend the scheme to Cabinet. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Any questions from the Cabinet? Councillor Alford, you kindly gave indication that you would like to ask some questions. So are you happy to ask them now?
Yes, I am. These will be brief. I think Councillor Homan and perhaps Councillor Harcourt has already had these questions from me. I'm sure we've had it at a pack. For the most part, I don't actually have a problem with the licensing. Where I get concerned is because I've had to help people apply for the licensing, that it was in the past very difficult, not for multiple landlords, they've got a whole system of doing it. It's for the one-off landlords if they're in particular streets. And I can think of one friend, and it was a friend, and I fully declare that, my past mayoress, she just gave up in the end, and I ended up doing the licensing for her. Some people became overwhelmed that there was the difficulty in acquiring the information we wanted. And I believe it was said previously that you were simplifying that. Is that correct?
So Harcourt?
There was a deafening silence.
Indeed. Thank you for drawing that to my attention. Very often, I think there has been problems with people understanding applications and such like. If that is indeed a problem, if you'd want to let me know the details of where the issues are, I'll make sure officers look into it and see what we can do to simplify matters. We're not into the game of trying to make things as difficult as possible for people to do it. It really needs to be as simple as possible. Certainly happy to look at that.
Well,
yes, I can. So I can underline that, Councillor Alford. We, if you do those details, we're continuously striving to make it easier for public to interact with the council, but sometimes that just doesn't work for all sorts of different reasons. If it's not working in those instances, it would be very good to look at those examples and go through them and trace back what in the system might be causing the problem. So certainly I can underline that commitment. Is there something else you want to add as well?
No, I think really that as long as we're really concentrating on what I call the big multiples, the one-off, we want high standard of housing. I think nobody would ever think that I disagreed with that. But as long as we think about the individual landlords who are not used to dealing with all this paperwork, and it does overwhelm them, and therefore they slip through the cracks. So that's really my comment about making sure we've got our forms user-friendly and our staff actually help people when they get stuck and not understanding what's being asked of them. Thank you.
Yes, I fully agree with everything you said. That is essentially the job of the council, is how do you make every single service we have easily accessible for people in all their diversity, and no one falls through the cracks. So if there are cracks, we need to take them away, and I welcome your constructive input on that. Okay, if anyone else wants to ask any more, no one else wants to ask any more questions, I will ask the Cabinet, are these recommendations agreed?
Agreed.
And they are. And can I ask officers to take note of Councillor Alford's comments? And I'm sure there's emails floating around. If there aren't, they can be re-forwarded. And if you can go through that, and we can look at what problems there might be and how we urgently resolve them. Right. Thank you very much. Next item then, Hammersmith Bridge, a major piece of work, major investment from the London Borough of Hammersmith and Fulham. Councillor Harcourt, would you care to introduce the report?
Thank you, Leader. Yeah, me again. I'm not going to go back over the whole history of the Hammersmith Bridge and the how we've discovered that there were cracks in there that led to the closure to motorised traffic back in April 2019. I think everybody here probably knows all about that. But basically, when the cracks widened in August 2020 in the heat wave, we had to close the bridge to both pedestrians, cyclists, and indeed to river traffic as well. After that process, in order to get to move things forward, we installed a number of monitoring schemes. We've been monitoring all the cracks and so on ever since, and we installed a heating system to deal with the expansion or, for that matter, contraction during hot and cold weather. As a result of all that work, the CCSO, that's the continued case for safe operation, they agreed we could reopen the bridge to pedestrians in July this year. But there was one condition that was part of that, and that was that the stabilisation work must be completed in as short a time as possible, and preferably by autumn next year. So this report here is about the procurement for that stabilisation work, which was originally, I think, being costed by TfL, for instance, at around about 45 million pounds. We have managed to get that down now, and it's been looked at by various experts in the area. World-class engineers had said that the method that's going to be used is absolutely fine, got it down to 8.9 million pounds for this stabilisation work. Obviously, this is important, this goes ahead. If it doesn't go ahead, then there's a possibility that at some stage in the future, we might have to close the bridge again. However, this is why this is so important. This is just the first stage in the work, where once the bridge is stabilised, which means it will then be safe for pedestrians and cyclists, we then have to start looking at the full strengthening of the bridge, which is the next stage, and there's other work on that. That was something that will come back to here, to the Cabinet and so on in the future. I should just say that this report recommends the procurement of that work and that it's done by FM Conway.
Thank you very much. Right, anything from the Cabinet? Okay, I can see a question from the Leader of the Opposition. So, Councillor Brocklebrank-Fowler, I call you to speak.
Thank you. I was interested to find out the details of Dr. Denton's report. These have gone back to TfL and are not available for me to look at or be sent. Could you answer the timescale about this?
Dr. Denton's report, which covers to some extent the stabilisation work and also the work and the various systems for the final strengthening of it. That is a report. It's still being considered. It was being discussed, as I believe, by the task force and by others at the moment. As soon as all those discussions are clear, there's no reason why it shouldn't be made available. Obviously, there may well be some commercially sensitive aspects to that report because it's looking at two different schemes. I can't give an exact date, but I would have thought fairly shortly.
Okay, Councillor, Sharon Lee, would you like to just clarify any further details? Sharon. Over to you, Sharon.
Thank you, Leader. The Steve Denton report that Councillor Brocklebrank-Fowler is talking about.
The question being asked is, when will the works be finished?
When will the report be available? We only
sorry, when will the bridge works be finished?
Oh, the bridge works be finished.
No. I asked about the report.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Sorry, I was just going to clarify, Leader, that the opposition member is actually speaking about the strengthening work. So this is a piece of work that has only recently come into the authority, and we are in the process of discussing that work at the moment. So we do need to carry on considering that, and then as soon as we've concluded that report would be available. But certainly. So it's not about this report under consideration for Cabinet tonight is about stabilisation. Yeah. This is the first phase, Leader. The reference that the opposition member is making is to the strengthening. So okay, let me just apologies if that's not clear.
Sorry, it wasn't clear. No, and thank you for clarifying, Sharon. So I should explain. I think what you're asking about is the final Steve Denton report on the final work to have the bridge made fully operational. And clearly, as with any sophisticated commercial procurement, there is a variety of confidential work that needs to go on, and that report, the Steve Denton report, will be made publicly available again through due process when we begin to tender for that report. That's not what's on the Cabinet member on the cabinet agenda tonight. What's on the cabinet agenda tonight is the stabilisation report. Can I ask you? Do you have any?
I'm well aware of that.
Can I ask then? Do you have any questions about? Sorry, let me finish my sentence, please. Do you have any questions about the report on the agenda tonight, Councillor Bottlebrank-Fowler?
Yes, I do.
Can you ask those? Can you ask those then, please?
Yes. My concern here is what we can't discuss till we get to the exempt part of the agenda. So are we doing this now, or how's this going to work?
Rhiann, can you detail how the exempt agenda works, please, Councillor Bottlebrank-Fowler? Rhiann Davis.
There is a resolution.
Sorry, Katia, you go ahead otherwise. Sorry, apologies, I couldn't find my unmute.
The resolution is at the end of the chair's note. You need to pass.
Rhiann, if you could just sum up, please, and answer.
Certainly. So if we're going to move to, if you wish to move to the exempt part of the agenda, then what I would recommend is that you continue any conversations that can be held in the open part of the agenda. And then I would delay the decision of this report then until the end of the meeting, when you can move into an exempt agenda, agenda item.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Rhiann. And that is just for clarification for the public, it is at the end of the agenda. So it essentially says under section 100A bracket 4 of the Local Government Act 1972 that the public and press should be excluded from the meeting during the consideration of the following items. Now that is where we can discuss that any confidential matters in the report, and that's where we will discuss the commercially confidential aspects that Victoria Bottlebrank-Fowler, Councillor Bottlebrank-Fowler wishes to raise. Can I go back to you, Councillor Bottlebrank-Fowler? Are there any issues that are not commercially confidential in the exempt agenda that you want to raise about this report?
I will pass over to Councillor Brown.
Right. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Leader. My question is related to the stabilisation project and the comments that Councillor Harcourt made relating to the possibility of the bridge being closed again for pedestrian traffic. Obviously, that has a huge impact on the lives of many people on both sides of the river, especially those who have to make multiple journeys across the bridge in a day, especially being those most severely affected, perhaps being school children who live on the other side of the bridge to where they go to school. In light of the recent decision with regard to the ferry, which understandably wasn't being progressed whilst the bridge was open to pedestrian traffic, what do we know about the likelihood of the bridge being closed again fully? And what mitigation is going to be put in place with regard to the timing of that? And is there any opportunity for emergency ferry access to be provided if the bridge is closed to pedestrians again?
I'll answer those questions, probably easiest to do. So you can imagine that there's been 3 stages, and I think Councillor Bottlebrank-Fowler's some of her comments earlier seem to relate to the final stage 3, and that's next. We haven't got there yet. The report here is stage 2, and what you had was in the summer stage 1. So what's essentially happened is the bridge was opened again to pedestrians and cyclists in the summer because of a number of different actions that the London Borough of Hammersmith and Fulham took. Indeed, neither the government nor TfL were aware that we were in a position to open the bridge when we necessarily opened it. And those actions were to, first of all, monitor the changes in the metals and the structure by putting on a vast array of monitoring systems. And secondly, and crucially, the London Borough of Hammersmith and Fulham paid for a heat control system, because what you may recall is that the bridge was closed to pedestrians and cyclists because a number of microfractures, which became cracks, rapidly increased in size in the pedestals after 6 of the hottest days that we'd had since 1965. And on that 6th day, the cracks just suddenly shot up in size. The monitoring system told us that, and we became extremely nervous because it was the pedestals that hold the suspension structure in place. If the suspension structures collapsed, the bridge would collapse. And that's where we were. We now have a very sophisticated way of monitoring that, and we're able to see that we were successfully controlling the temperature within acceptable boundaries. We have a variety of engineers working on this, and in fact, we bring different engineers at different times, which has been the story of this bridge. Because they find different problems that often require different levels of expertise. Not unlike medicine, when you're treating a completely new disease or illness, sometimes they're trying to figure out what's going on as it's going on. And that's certainly the story of this unique bridge. So that's where we've got to. We were very concerned in opening the bridge that we wouldn't be closing it again a week later or a month later, or that there wouldn't be protracted periods of closure. So we've measured what the engineers have been able to assure us is that will not happen, and that we will only be closing the bridge for nighttime works, and indeed for possibly over weekends where we give plenty of notice. And the disruption we have a good understanding of, because we have been particularly active in listening to the residents that have been effective. So that was our decision. Now, meanwhile, what you have is the task force, the government task force's decision, and the ferry was their decision. The ferry is a responsibility of the government and of TfL, not the London Borough of Hammersmith and Fulham. We're responsible for bridge. We're not responsible for all river crossings. And the responsibility of the bridge is purely for historic reasons. So the task force, back, I think it was in September, when it realized we'd opened the bridge in July, I think it was, wanted to wait and see how often the bridge might close. They were reassured by the Hammersmith and Fulham's engineers' reports that it would be minimal. Indeed, since it's opened, we haven't closed it, I think you'll note. And they, in September, delayed the decision to go ahead with their ferry on that basis. And at the last meeting, there was an emergency task force meeting called either last week or the week before. The chair of the task force wanted to know where did we go next, because I think the ferry was going to cost another £20 million, I think it was, to build. I think that's a figure from memory. And they were going to have to commit a serious amount of public money, which that is. And they wanted to know, should they do that, given the fact that if the ferry is built, there were, people would have to pay £1.56 to travel, but more importantly, they would probably have to queue for about half an hour in terms of the process of getting onto the ferry, crossing, coming off, doing it safely in COVID times, whilst watching their friends and neighbours walking across the bridge just meters away. And so as a consequence, the task force chose to cancel the ferry. That's a task force decision, a government and TfL decision, not a Hammersmith and Fulham decision. I am happy to provide cover for Baroness Veer and TfL, in that I fully support their decision. It was the right thing to do, because it would have been, I think, unnecessary if the assurances we've had from the engineers are correct. So that, I think, left everybody on the task force very confident, but it was a task force decision not to go ahead with the ferry. In terms of what this report today is about, it's very simply about stopping the bridge falling into the river. The bridge is an ancient structure. It is completely unsafe for long-term use without works to make it safe. And there were 2 schemes. Anyone who's followed this story will know there were 2 other stages coming forward. There was, how do we stabilize it? And you remember that the TfL work initially said it would cost £46 million to stabilize it, and that the total repair would cost £141 million. But if we wanted to do it quicker than 6 years, £163 million. Now, just to put that into context, that is way beyond what any other council in Britain is having to pay. We're a borough council, not a county council. So even where councils have committed funding to bridges, such as in Lowestoft or in Great Yarmouth, it hasn't cost, it's been the county councils that have done it, not small borough councils. And in London, just to make again a comparison on those sums, Albert Bridge cost £9.7 million to fix. Chiswick Bridge cost £9 million to fix. And Wandsworth Bridge, which is a steel cantilever structure built and opened in 1940, is costing less than £7 million to fix, probably £6, because it's not particularly pleasant bridge, but it's a very well-structured bridge made decades after our own beloved Hammersmith Bridge. So those figures are eye-watering to any administration. And the idea that Hammersmith and Fulham's residents have to pay for that bridge would be eye-watering to any administration, specifically when most of the people who've been affected, most of the letters we've had by a very large way are from the residents in Barnes and that immediate area. And that is an indicator of the need for wider action. So what are we agreeing tonight? Well, again, I want to pay praise to Bram Canafe and Sharon Lee for the approach that Hammersmith and Fulham takes, which is an innovative approach to always try and scope out other solutions, because we were sort of trapped in the headlights, this £46 million bill, which the government and the TfL had agreed we would pay a third. Just so we know, as public record, TfL normally pays 85% of all bridge works. So that's what it paid for the Albert Bridge, for example. So for us to pay a third of a total amount is a staggeringly large amount. It is therefore great relief to the people of Hammersmith and Fulham that Sharon and Bram were able to procure different engineering solutions. And because we'd created such interest in the engineering community, because this is a completely unique structure, we were able to get many very good engineers offering different solutions. And the solution before us tonight is a solution that is costing less than £9 million, which is significantly less in comparison to the £46 million that was on the table in order to stabilize a bridge and stop it falling in the river. Now, I'm not in a position to make a decision on what's the best option forward. Is it the £46 million or is it the £9 million? And neither, believe it or not, are Sharon or Bram. So we brought in Dr. Steve Denton to do an initial report on the stabilisation. And what he has said is two crucial things. The option we've got before us tonight is not only much better value, it is much better engineering. And that's the thing that everyone should note, is we've gone to the private sector, found a much better engineering solution, and it is significantly better value to the residents of Hammersmith and Fulham. That's the paper we're considering tonight. I think it's a fantastic paper. And whilst I look forward to hearing any concerns that anyone might make in the confidential section of this report, I think that is the overall context of this report before us tonight, which we now need to legally consider. So on that basis, are there any more questions? I know I've given a comprehensive answer, but I'm aware people with interest in the bridge will be tuning in at some point, whether now live or later on YouTube. And I'm very happy to share all the information that we have. But in short, the London Borough of Hammersmith and Fulham, nobody else is putting money in here to stabilise the bridge and to stop the thing that kept me awake for many nights in the days when we closed the bridge, which was that it could collapse into the river under the right circumstances. This will fix this. It will fix it within the next 9 months, most likely. But as Sharon says, we have to go through a procurement process, and there are supply chain issues since we've left the European Union, but certainly within the next year. And that, I think, is a very good day in Hammersmith and Fulham. Are there any more questions on the report before us tonight? In which case, is this paper agreed? Thank you very much. Paper is agreed. And Sharon, you can start procuring the works. So thank you very much again to you, Sharon, and to Bram, and to...
Councillor Cowan.
Sorry, I've closed the item now. I would try and stress, we've just agreed the report. The item is now closed. There is a process to the formal cabinet meeting. I did give you plenty of chance to make questions.
Councillor Cowan, the monitoring officer said that because of the exempt agenda, that you would do the vote at the end of the meeting, and you've just failed to do that.
Shall I come in at this point? The process needs to be that the decision will need to be taken now, but unfortunately the exempt discussion will have to be afterwards, because we're not in a position to be able to go from exempt. We can't go from exempt live stream and back in, and the decision has to be taken in the public domain. So nothing in the exempt, unless the committee, the cabinet, choose to take decisions, choose to go into exempt, there's nothing that can be said virtually that will now go in towards the decision makers. So my recommendation is that we go into the exempt discussion at the end of the meeting, and then when there's no press and public, all parties can have their exempt discussions. But the decision itself has to be taken in the public domain, with only the conversations from those that are in the room.
That's right. And as I said in the preamble, we will come back to...
I'm sorry,
Councillor Bottle-Brown-Valley, if you please talk when I call you. There is a process here. Appreciate you haven't been to this cabinet meeting for a very long time, but there is a process, and I would ask you to follow it. Now, the process is this. I call you to speak, and you speak.
It's very patronising.
Now, I am saying to you, it's the truth, isn't it? So you keep raising questions about process. You would know more about the process if you came to the meeting, each meeting. So as the monitoring officer has said, we've formally agreed it. As I said in my preamble, we will come back to this in the exempt items. I can give you an assurance. If there is anything significant legally that you want to raise, then we will deal with that. We will deal with that then. And if it meant we had to change the decision, I give you my word that we would change it. But as that is not envisaged, and there is a due process to this rather bizarre online meeting, then I would ask you to follow that, and would remind you to speak when I call you and not at any other time. Now, with that item has been agreed, I will move on now to the next item, which is on the South Fulham Traffic Congestion and Pollution Reduction Scheme. And over to you, Councillor Harcourt.
Thank you again. This is a very, very detailed report on the South Fulham TCPR scheme. That's the Traffic Congestion and Pollution Control Scheme, experimental scheme. And the report is about whether we should make that scheme, experimental scheme, permanent or not. The report also includes that if it's made permanent, there would be followed statutory consultation on a 20-mile-per-hour speed limit in Wandsworth Bridge Road and also New Kings Road, as well as further consultation on extending the scheme to Wandsworth Bridge Road and roads west of that area. I'm sure most of you know that this came about as a result of the closure of Harwood Terrace as an experimental scheme a while ago, and that then followed a whole series of complaints about congestion, air pollution, and such like. Following all those complaints, we set up a SW6 Traffic Working Party, which was chaired by Councillor Coleman and consisted of a variety of residents associations, and so on from across the South Fulham area, and was also attended by Councillor Matt Thorley, one of the opposition councillors for that particular area. What happened and what came out of that was eventually that officers developed what was an innovative scheme, which came into place in July 2020, and the scheme using ANPR cameras to stop people running through the area. And we also included in this an air monitoring network of some 56 pollution monitors across the area. I'm not going into all the detail of the scheme, otherwise be here for the rest of the evening, but the net effect of the scheme shows in brief, there's been a significant reduction in the amount of traffic in residential roads. something in the area of 75% reduction in the residential roads to the east of Wandsworth Bridge Road, a lesser amount, although still nonetheless a reduction in Wandsworth Bridge Road and the west, something perhaps 7, 8, 9% of that sort of order. The pollution figures that have come out go from where we are, a very high pollution, poor air quality area across the borough, to the South Fulham area being the only part of the borough that actually meets the World Health Organization minimum standards for air quality, and in fact now it exceeds those. There's been support from the scheme. Originally, when it was first being discussed, as you can see from the report, there were some 90% of people objected to it. Again, a year later, in September 2021, you can see it's well over 90% of people are now supporting that particular scheme. The various residents' associations who've been part of the discussions and part of the working party have also written to us showing their support, but I am aware that there are still a number of people who are objecting to that, some of those within those associations. Now, there have been 1 or 2 issues raised, and it's something that we're looking at and something we'll continue to work on. For instance, we had a petition from Oakbury Road about traffic and what was being done to monitor that. We've looked at that. We've said, OK, we're going to put some traffic monitoring in there. And when we've looked at that and found out what the problems are, we will see what we can do to address that particular road. So where there's individual problems, we are still prepared to look at them and deal with them. The same came up with a number of residents complaining about not being able to get Uber drivers and Uber taxis and so on into the area. So we've done an awful lot of work with Uber to the extent that Uber have now developed their own route map, which they've given to their drivers so that they can get into and out of that scheme quite safely without incurring any sort of penalty. So, there's all of those things. Others have raised issues, and in light of, the current situations that we've known about safety for women, we're working with our new law enforcement team and highways to look at how can we improve lighting and how can we make sure that there is safety in that area for women walking home, especially later in the evening. So while the report here is recommending that we make the scheme permanent, obviously, if there are other issues that come up from time to time, we will look at those and address those as we move forward. I don't know whether Councillor Coleman, as you chaired that working party, whether you want to add anything, excuse me, whether you would like to add anything.
I'll bring Councillor Coleman in at the end. Are there any questions at this stage? No questions, in which case, Councillor Coleman.
Yep.
Councillor Bottlebank-Fowler, I'm happy to ask you 2 questions, and I would ask you to speak now.
Thank you. The start, the major issue has been the lack of proper consultation across a whole area that is going to be affected. The Harwood Terrace consultation, quite frankly, people actually said no, don't make the changes, and that was ignored. And that led to you having to put in something on the eastern side. The myriad of problems that that's caused, and I'm particularly concerned about public safety. When you don't have any traffic on residential roads, as a pedestrian walking, it makes you feel very, very unsafe. And this is a number of complaints that I've received from residents, along with the fact that drivers, although Councillor Harcourt has intimated they have a new map, it still doesn't mean that they will sit and come and collect you or drop you off when the Wandsworth Bridge Road itself, which is also a residential road, is completely blocked from end to end for most of the day and early evening at least. It seems extraordinary that this process started from such a small, seemingly irrelevant decision about Harwood Terrace, and is now affecting the east side and the west side. And in this paper, you're only proposing to now make the east side permanent, and that you will be looking at the west side. So this doesn't help the west side, and it doesn't help the residents on Wandsworth Bridge Road who are suffering from pollution. I think it's extraordinary that this decision was taken during a pandemic when people's road movements and behaviour has suddenly altered. You know, I would like to know the reasoning behind you doing poll proposal in the first place.
Sorry, can I just clarify, Councillor Bottlebank? Are you saying you would, obviously you're going to vote against this, well, you don't have a vote, but you're arguing we should not do this. Is
I
that
don't
right?
have a vote.
I know, I've just said that.
No, I'm arguing against your consultation process, which is very unfair. Because
I'm going to call Councillor. I'm going to call Councillor.
It ignores what people said.
I'm going to call Councillor Coleman in a minute, who will detail the level of consultation that's gone on and the level of consultation that will happen. That will be the same as the consultation, the same rich consultation that's gone on. But can I just clarify at this point? You're against this report? Are you?
No, your report is a fudge. It does not solve the issues that I think you're trying theoretically to solve.
But just to clarify, though, because what we have to do in a couple of minutes.
No, I'm sorry. I think I've been perfect. I think I've been perfectly
So, are
clear.
you asking us? Because
the consultation process should have been done literally from house to house, flat to flat, across the whole of the South Fulham area.
But just to clarify, because we have a paper before us, and Councillor Coleman in a minute will detail about the whole of the South Fulham area and what's going on there. But just to clarify, we have a paper before us. There have been policy and accountability committees that have reviewed this. There have been many public consultations and large working groups that have reviewed this. So it's not just the council, it's also the product of different residents groups. But we now have this report before us, and we're going to have to make a decision. I am going to have to make a decision.
Yes, it's nothing to do with me. I can't vote.
For or against this. Are you here to urge me to vote for it or against it?
No, I can't vote.
You're going to sit on the fence. Okay.
I
just wanted to try and clarify.
I'm leaving you with your own fudge decision.
Right. Okay. You can see there's an irony there, really. In not answering the question, but I will pass over. To.
It's not up to me to do.
I will pass over to Councillor Brown. But thank you for clarifying that you're not willing to make a view one way or the other. But now I'll pass over to Councillor Brown. Do you have any indication? Should we vote for this or against it? That's what we're normally lobbied on in these meetings, and that's the decision we get to make in a few minutes' time.
As you well know, Councillor Cowan, that's not how these meetings work. The purpose of this meeting is for us to ask questions relevant to the report. And the question that I want to ask is relating to recommendation 3. And I want to receive some clarity with regard to the timeline and details with regard to the statutory consultation process.
Councillor Coleman.
Thank you, Leader. The report sets it out quite a lot of detail. I appreciate, Leader, that not everybody at this committee today or asking questions has had the time or spent the time in going through the immense detail contained in this report, but it's certainly worth doing that. It's worth doing that for, it responds to the immense amount of work we've done with Uber to improve the situation there, which many residents say to me has resolved the situation of some people not being picked up. It talks about the outcome of the statutory consultation process and many other things. I just want to come back, if I may, to start by coming back to a point that Councillor Brocklebank-Fowler surprised me by making. She surprised me in several ways, but the first thing is she said, when you have no traffic on the roads, you feel unsafe. But that's not what this scheme does. It doesn't take all the traffic off the roads. It's not a classic low traffic neighbourhood where you block off entire roads, which have caused problems for other well-meaning councils elsewhere in London. This is a traffic congestion and pollution reduction scheme. It uses smart cameras. So every single resident of Hammersmith and Fulham can go into every single road in the traffic congestion pollution reduction, the TCPR scheme, without hindrance. Which means, Councillor Brockenbach-Fowler, that it isn't the case that there are no cars on the roads. There are cars on the roads. There are also cars which belong to carers, there are emergency vehicles, there are black taxis, there are cars on the road. What it does mean is, well, there are plenty of cars on the road because we've taken 8,000 cars and a ton of carbon monoxide off the road every day, but there are still cars on the road. And I don't think you've read every single page of this report, or perhaps not with the detail it deserves. The question of engagement, if I may, is also, I'm a little surprised because I must say I was going to thank the hundreds of residents who engaged with us on the scheme to the east, on working out a scheme to the west, which this report refers to, and also to bringing in improvements to Wandsworth Bridge Road, including a 20-mile-an-hour limit, which is what residents have asked for, which is what this report will move towards. And I was going to thank, as well as the residents, I was going to thank Councillor Matt Thorley, the Conservative councillor for the west of Wandsworth Bridge Road. I was going to thank the support that we received from his colleagues, Mark Loveday and Councillor Francis Stainton. And Mark Loveday wrote to us, I fully support a trial TCPR scheme across the whole of South Fulham, including west of the Wandsworth Bridge Road, subject, of course, to consultation. Forgive me, he didn't write this to us. He wrote this to a resident who passed this on to us. Councillor Loveday said this was all in the public domain. He also said, Councillor Loveday, I have shown this email. This is the email in which he says, I fully support a TCPR scheme across the whole of South Fulham, including west of the Wandsworth Bridge Road, subject, of course, to consultation. He says, I've shown this email to Francis, Matt, and Victoria, who agree with the contents. That's Councillor Francis Stainton, that's Councillor Matt Thorley, who chaired so many of the meetings so well and so helpfully, and that's Councillor Victoria Brocklebank-Fowler, who is here with us today, Chair, and who's asked some questions which show less of the enthusiasm for the scheme than Councillor Loveday gave us to indicate that she actually has. So I'm a little confused about the Conservative position, but I'm certainly very grateful for Matt Thorley's engagement. Now, now the point about engagement is very important, and I just want to come on to that. We didn't get it right at the beginning. Councillor Brocklebank-Fowler is absolutely correct. We didn't get it right at the beginning. We didn't consult properly on the original proposals for Harwood Terrace, and we said that. We said that publicly. We said that in this room, publicly, at a public meeting. We're sorry we didn't consult properly. We're going to take a new approach. And the new approach we took was to start with a resident-led working party. Well, sorry, I led, but residents sat on, forgive me, resident working party, made up of people I'd never met before, most of whom were selected from people who just came forward, and we chose, just by putting a pin in the map, the streets that seemed best. And we had regular meetings, 12 to 20 people working out the details of the scheme. At the scheme then came COVID. And then there were more details, there were more meetings, the scheme came in, and then we started discussing the scheme on the west, whether it shouldn't also be extended to the west, because a lot of residents were pressing us to do that. And we had meetings online about that. I must have chaired, I've totted it up. We then had meetings with the Wandsworth Bridge Road residents who came together, lots of meetings with them. And in these meetings, because most of them were happening on Zoom, and that enables an incredible level of engagement, which was never possible before. We would have 50, 100, 120 people in these meetings, and officers would give incredibly detailed reports showing slides, and we would stop in the middle of meetings. We would ask questions, we would analyze, we would challenge the data, which is an extraordinary thing that simply wasn't possible in the same way as it is with Zoom. When you've got it in your room, you can look at the slides, you can look at the data, and lots of people can be involved. So we had hundreds and hundreds of people. And then, of course, we brought them all together, the Wandsworth Bridge Road people, the people from the east, the residents living to the west, for equally to develop a scheme that can be for the whole borough. And I'm very grateful to Councillor Thorley for taking on these meetings and holding 4 or 5 meetings with, I gather, up to 300 people himself, so that we have the best possible scheme. So we have engaged very extensively. I'm not aware of any detailed discussion of this nature anywhere in the country that has ever taken place. And that is sadly because there's never been a coronavirus before, and we have never been able to have hundreds and hundreds of people participating in a Zoom meeting. And we were determined to use this in the best possible way to get real engagement. And that means people make points. It was down to the level of, do you think we should put a camera there or 3 streets down? Good point, we'll put it 3 streets down, because the residents directly were asking us, my street's not included and the streets roundabout, I think they're going to be disadvantaged by this scheme. They should be included. We looked at the evidence. Yes, we included them. So there's a huge amount of engagement, and Councillor Thorley will give you a lot more detail, no doubt, about that. Now, we have to do things in the right order. We're coming to the end of the legal period for the experimental scheme, and that is, we think, widely supported by residents. And there were many residents who didn't know about these groups, which involved hundreds of people. I appreciate that. We think we're reaching, the whole borough. We think the fact that we sent a newsletter to 12,000 people telling them what was happening, the fact that my colleague, Councillor Harcourt, wrote to 12,000 residents, encouraging them to put their views forward on Commonplace. Yet still, there are lots of people who don't know about these things. I mean, I bumped into a lady in North End Road. I was getting something from one of the many excellent food vans there, and so was she, and we got chatting. And she mentioned she lived in South Fulham, and I said to her, oh, what do you think of a traffic scheme? And she said, it's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Said, it's really good air. It's made my life so much better. And another 80-year-old lady said, I actually can cross the road now without worrying. She didn't say there were no cars, she said there were fewer cars. So I think it's been a very good, so what will happen next is, what will happen next is that the scheme to the east, if we agree tonight, Leader, scheme to the east will be made permanent. And we think that's what residents there want. The residents to the west have made it very clear to us that they want it extended, and that would be the case. This paper enables that to happen following a consultation, because that's what we need to do. And also, one of the many things that the people living on Wandsworth Bridge Road have said to us, we ought to extend the 20 miles an hour there. This will be, again, possible. This paper enables a statutory consultation to take place on that. And also, this paper makes it clear the commitment that the council has to carry out further traffic mitigation measures on Wandsworth Bridge Road and in the area. Because this scheme has never been, we just bring it in and then we walk away. It's always been a scheme which we brought in, developed with residents, and then we've worked with residents to make it better. And that's what we're going to carry on doing. So I do hope it will, perhaps you'll come off the fence and be able to support it, because your colleagues, councillors, Conservative councillors to the west have been very helpful and supportive, and we've been grateful for that.
Any more questions? Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Leader. I think a lot of what you referred to, Councillor Coleman, was during my tenure as leader of the Conservative group. And just for clarification, Councillor Thorley, as well as the other councillors for Parsons Green, participated in this process, and in many ways, alongside yourself and Councillor Harcourt, as you rightly pointed out, have helped lead this process. And that has been at the request and the behest of firstly, when I was leader, and then secondly, Councillor Brocklebank Fowler, to engage with the council as well as local residents to make sure that the mistakes that Councillor Coleman has admitted to are addressed. Now, it's all right and good that councillors for Parsons Green and Walham, supporting the wishes of their residents with regards to an extension to the west of Wandsworth Bridge Road. However, obviously, both myself and Councillor Brocklebank Fowler represent not just another ward in Fulham, but also the whole borough. Now, our concerns, whilst wanting to respect the views and wishes of those in the very south of the borough, we also have concerns about what will then happen once the western extension is brought in, if and when that happens. And what will then happen to the north of New Kings Road? Will then it be necessary to bring in another scheme in the wards north of there? If that then happens, will then need to be a scheme further north of there? And at what point does this stop? And I think there's not been full consultation with the much wider area. And according to your report, and this is something that I don't think either yourself or Councillor Coleman answered, your report in section 3 of the recommendations says that the Cabinet approves the making of a permanent traffic management order the South Fulham TCPRE scheme, along with any necessary associated highway works subject to the outcome of the statutory consultation process. Now, I agree with Councillor Coleman that there's been an exceptional level of engagement with different groups within the area, but that is a very different thing to a statutory consultation process, which is legally part of the process by which you convert an experimental traffic order into a permanent one.
No, look, look. These are all good points, but they're coming. With a great respect, I think they're coming from a point that you haven't been following this to the extent that we have, and I think you do make a very good point in that this started off as a very bad thing. We made a mistake 3 years ago, and organisations do that, and I can understand why the opposition would want to keep referring back to that. But that was a long time ago, and lessons were learned. Sorry, Councillor, can I just stress, Councillor? Can I just stress
regarding this? So it's
Councillor, can I just stress, this is not some pub or cafe. This is the cabinet meeting of the London Borough of Hammersmith and Fulham, and I appreciate, and I owe you both an apology because I said you hadn't been here for over a year. You haven't been here since the 1st of March 2021. And that's a long time. And I appreciate that Councillor Bottlebank sits on the pack, but other people don't. But there is a process here. And this is not a barroom argument. This is a formal process. So you can only speak when the chair calls you to speak. Now, in this instance, the chair is me. And I'd be grateful if you would show respect to the process that has been laid down by full council with support from and is the legal practice process. This is not some ridiculous debate in the council chamber. This is a formal decision-making body. So speak when I call you, please. Otherwise, I will stop calling you. And it's as simple as that. Now, the fact is, the council did mess this thing up when Harwood Terrace started, and people were rightly upset. And organisations do make mistakes, but you can divide organisations into two types. You can divide those organisations who listen and try and learn from a mistake, and those other organisations who carry on and dig in and make it worse. And we were certainly the former, because Councillor Coleman chaired over 25 meetings of this. In terms of consultation, and I think a real tribute to him that many of the people who came to the full council meeting to raise concerns are now avid supporters of the scheme that Councillor Coleman and later Councillor Harcourt have put together. Now, it's not a perfect scheme because it needs to roll out, but we have a process of not only doing statutory consultation, which is minimal, as you know, but also going above and beyond, which is why we have carried out, we have met with hundreds and hundreds of people. Over 1,000 people have been to different meetings during this time. And many of those people keep coming back, which is a real sign of how important this is. Indeed, we got to a point, and I believe this was fundamental, where we had Conservative Party members who were ward chairs and activists coming to us saying, we don't know how to get our politicians on side. This looks quite good. How can we stop the party political game playing? And we said, that's up to you. Indeed, what we said to them is we're not going to do anything unless there is a consensus. And that consensus has been arrived at, which is why we have the paper for a first stage change, which is what we have before us tonight. There is also a commitment to roll this out further into the West, which is why that has support too. And if you look at the numbers of support, but more importantly, the fact that this part of Fulham has gone from being one of the most polluted, one of the dirtiest parts of Fulham, to the only part of the borough that meets World Health Organization quality standards, then you can see that the impact has been considerable. And the reason it's been considerable, and the reason it's different to anything else happening anywhere else in the capital, is because it doesn't punish residents. Anybody who has a car can drive through the area if they live in the London Borough of Hammersmith and Fulham. What it's done is very clever. It's recognised that there are vast amounts of traffic coming down the A3 corridor as far away as Sussex, through Guildford and into London. And that traffic often uses the Wandsworth Bridge Road cut through as precisely that, as a way of getting into the West End and into the city. And that was causing the air quality, which was affecting the health of people in South Fulham. Now, it's a complicated problem because it's a big, diverse city with lots of different challenges. But the way to work this through has been to share that evidence with the people who turned up to the meetings and give them as much power as possible and legally viable. And that's exactly what's happened. So the reason there is so much support for this paper is because of the consultation, but also because people have taken the trouble to work through the evidence and reach their own conclusions independently. That's how this has worked. Exactly the same will happen as if there are any extensions. But someone living north of the New King's Road should not be worried, because often that traffic, in its frustration, in the congestion they would find themselves in, would cut through Parsons Lane, would try and find other ways up to Lily Road, would race around trying to get to work on a particularly bad congestion day. And any one thing can cause congestion, from a broken down bin lorry to a traffic accident. So that's the problem with London in the 21st century, and what the residents, led by Ben and then later led by Councillor Fawley, because I made it very clear to Ben we would not be doing this, and we made it very clear to the residents I wasn't going to spend a penny on this of public money if there was going to be political shenanigans and people messing around saying one thing privately and another thing publicly. And so the tribute to Councillor Fawley is he has actually rolled his sleeves up and publicly said he supports this scheme. And that's why it's going ahead, because we've got rid of the shenanigans, understandable shenanigans, given the competitive nature of Hammersmith and Fulham politically, but still shenanigans all the same. And something got in the way of cleaning the air and improving the health of the people in that important part of Fulham. So that's what's happened. And just to clarify, you said I know full well what the meeting about. The policy and accountability committees are where these debates happen, where policies can be changed, where people make changes to ideas. By the time a report gets to the cabinet meeting, it has gone through that process of public consultation, and it's gone through the process of adaptation through policy and select committee hearings. And this is the chance where we just say yes or no. That's what we're legally here to do. So when you said I know full well what the meeting's about, it's nice to see you here again. But what I'm asking is, are you in favour of it or not? Now, I appreciate why you don't want to answer it. I can understand what you're doing there, but I'm keen to crack on. Unless there's anything you want to say that will help us going forward, I'm going to close the debate. Because this is the decision-making meeting. It's not the policy-making meeting. The policy is before us to be made a yay or nay. Is there anything you want to say, Councillor Brown, first? I'll ask you on this particular paper in front of us.
Thank you. With the greatest respect, and I apologise for speaking over you briefly before. And obviously, I do have a huge amount of respect for the administration and the process of this council. I think the point I was making, and I wasn't seeking to enter into debate, I think it's you and your colleagues who've spoken at far greater length on this. I think that the questions that I was making were quite clear and related to the report, and one of them you have answered with regards to a possible northern extension once the western extension has been rolled out. However, you've still not answered the very simple question relating to the report with regards to the statutory consultation. And that was, I've asked that now twice.
Yeah, sorry, I thought I had answered it. We will, in that section, we will carry out not just the statutory consultation as we go forward, but we will work with residents in adapting those. And that, I think, will be done by your colleague, Councillor Fawley, as much as it will be council officers. And the statutory consultation will be just the spearhead of it. There'll be a much wider consultation, and very much in the culture and vein of what you've seen over the last 2 years. In terms of any extension west, that will also be similarly consulted on. It's a very simple fact. We are stretched on public money, and we have huge objectives, public health objectives to meet, like cleaning the quality of the air and improving the quality of life for our residents. You cannot join the two up if you have a vehement campaign against something. So if we want to move the campaign north in towards that, you are currently the cabinet, ward councillor for, we would fully expect not only to be working with your residents, but to be working with you in order to make those decisions and have a consensus on what is right for that very important part of our borough. And that's, I think, been the success of where we've got to so far. And it's a very good way to go forward. And I do commend Councillor Fawley for stepping in. Although I made it clear I would just pull the scheme if we didn't have support for it, because it's not worth putting a lot of public money into something if people don't want it or don't see the benefits of it. But people do want it, and they do see the benefits of it. It's a tribute to what's happened in the East, that people want it in the West. And I think if we can create that consensus, we're happy to work across the political divide to significantly improve the environment for people who live in our wonderful borough, even if they are Conservative wards, which is what I think you've seen us doing here. So on that basis, and I hope you're happy to accept that assurance, in which case I'll move on to Councillor Coleman, who has one more thing to say, and then I'll wrap up the whole thing. Okay.
Councillor Cowan, I can't hear you. I don't know whether I'm the only one or not.
Okay. I'm saying, sorry, I'm saying on that basis then, I'm happy to sum up the report. I would like to thank Sharon Holder, who's done an amazing job on this. I would like to thank, pardon? Sorry, all the Sharons. I would like to thank Sharon Holder for being here. I would like to thank Sharon Lee for having done an amazing job on this. Bram Canneth has done an amazing job on it. And John Goldsworthy is just a superstar. And I think it's his attention to detail and scientific understanding of what traffic does in a complicated city with an ancient roadmap like London's that actually has been crucial to us coming up with, I think, what is the most innovative air quality improvement scheme and quality of life improvement scheme anywhere in the capital. So I'm particularly grateful to those officers. And for anyone tuning in, asking what about happening next, I would say get involved, look at the details. We will provide officers, we will provide evidence, and we will act on the evidence in the best interest of our residents, wherever they live. In Hammersmith, Fulham, Shepherd's Bush, and throughout. And that's the best way forward. So thank you to all those residents who did turn up to the meetings and who did take part. And I ask the Cabinet, is this item agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Now we have a forward plan of key decisions. Are those decisions noted?
Noted.
Now we move to discussion of exempt items, and I can tell the public we will be talking about the Hammersmith Bridge paper, and I stick to my assurance given earlier. And as a consequence of that, I